To live on a day-to-day basis is insufficient for human beings. We need to transcend, transport, escape. We need meaning, understanding, and explanation. We need to see overall patterns in our lives. We need hope, the sense of a future, and we need freedom, or at least the illusion of freedom, to get us beyond ourselves, whether with telescopes and microscopes and our ever-burgeoning technology, or in states of mind that allow us to travel to other worlds, to rise above our immediate surroundings. Oliver Sacks. Patreon.com/Bickford. Thanks for the support. For over a decade, my father's death had been a sore subject, and Father's Day was a difficult time of the year for me. This is a video about why it isn't.
Cabs are driving me around.
So I was jamming out to some dad rock on Father's Day, thinking about my late father and whether or not he'd like my favorite songwriter, Jeff Tweedy. Here he is with Love is the King. This is the vinyl edition for the live double album, and it looks like that's shots fired right there. 2019, a month after Jeff Tweedy and Wilco released Ode to Joy with the hit single Love is Everywhere, shots were fired at his home. Interesting. Here's Wilco over at Red Rocks Amphitheater in Colorado last year.
It's raining down. It's ours now. It's all right now. Love is everywhere. Right now. Love is everywhere.
So that record came out in 2019, and Jeff is singing about love is everywhere, beware. Later, Jeff would release his solo record, Love is the King, and so we have the corona on the king representing love, or vice versa. So love is everywhere, beware could be a warning in 2019 about the upcoming coronavirus and the return of the king. So we kind of have a ode to joy, or a fellowship of the ring, and then we have the two towers, or the event that affects everyone, like the corona lockdowns, and then we have the return of the king, which is love. And this maps onto some of the patterns of my work, if you've been following what I've been doing here with the unified code theory and my own visual art. I've been taking a look at the way in which precognitive symbolism has embedded future events, and I've been able to produce visual art that kind of, in a way similar to Jeff Tweedy's lyrics, looked like coronavirus before it happened. And it's hard to believe, but some of those time-stamped predictive videos are still up on this channel. Anyway, I was sitting down with my Lyrics of Jeff Tweedy book, and I was looking at Jeff's lyrics and listening to different songs and thinking about how art imitates life. In several songs, Jeff Tweedy equates a bird with a type of ghost, and here the hummingbird is floating fast and standing still in the past. It's something that kind of transcends the barriers of time and space. It's almost like a symbol for light, and white light and birds repeatedly show up in Jeff's lyrics, and when I was thinking about that, I got a message. And it was from my father, which is kind of weird because he's been dead for over a decade. In Jeff's song, A Robin or a Wren, Jeff sings about being reincarnated as a bird for the end of the world. It's co-written by George Saunders, the author of Lincoln in the Bardo. That's a story about a father named Abraham so grief-stricken by the loss of his son that he transcends the barriers of time and space to venture into the underworld and behold the spirits and ghosts so that he might see his son one last time. In the book of Genesis, there's actually two accounts of creation, and Yahweh has a second order of creation. It's almost like two worlds, and one is interfered with in a different way. And this is embedded in a larger pattern in the existence of the Old and New Testaments together with the Holy Bible. It's almost like the New Testament is kind of an apology. Christ identifies himself as the light and the way. And I think of that hologram kind of symbol there. And then I think about love being the king, and the king is the way and the light. And so, well, I'm reminded of Luke Skywalker being like a hologram Lincoln in the Bardo, projecting himself out of his duty, born out of love. So he's going to rescue people he loves and project himself as a being of light. In a world of light, perhaps. It's been almost a century that particle physics has shown us that the world is not quite what we see it as. It's more of a collection of waves and potentials that move around in patterns, and sometimes observing those patterns decides what kind of pattern they'll be. So it's kind of like we're finding Christ, the light and the way, and how we approach that and apprehend it and pay attention to it describes what kind of relationship we have with
it. So, you might not give a damn. I'm like a hologram. That is all I am. Time's nothing I can't keep. It's the same as when I sleep. If time is just to kill, then I will.
Now, the mentioning of the Holy Spirit will often turn off a lot of the left-leaning Wilco fans, and Jeff's a lefty himself. But nonetheless, Jeff Tweedy repeatedly appeals to biblical symbolism and paraphrases the Gospel of John even. And we find here someone is in the deep chrome canyons of the loudest Manhattan. No one can hear him or anything, so he goes to a mountain. It reminds me of this idea in The Brothers Karamazov, where Dostoevsky's character is describing hell as the suffering endured from the inability to love. So this disconnection from love, which is everywhere, must be painful. So if someone is surrounded by the chrome canyon of Manhattan, they might be in their own personal hell cognitively. They may need to head up to the mountains like Moses or Abraham. Symbolically, this happens to Noah and Christ in the wilderness for 40 days as well. So we just got over a quarantino, which means 40 days, and now I'm looking at symbolism that's biblical in some of my favorite artists, and I believe that Jeff is a bit of a Wilco creator. And there's a message here that there is something of a reckoning for certain people, and the whole world is kind of getting a tune-up. And if you want to make it through the Bardo, which is something like a spiritual karmic way station, then you're going to want to kind of embrace that spirit of love. There's a biography of the writer, friend of George Saunders, David Foster Wallace, who passed away and killed himself in 2008. That biography by D.T. Max is called Every Love Story is a Ghost Story. And that sounds like it could be an alternate title for Lincoln in the Bardo.
I thought that it was a matter of real concern that planted stories intended to serve a national purpose abroad came home.
I wanted to write about this stuff right in front of my eyes, microscopically looking at America and asking questions about each little thing, he would observe in 2004. Is that America? Is buying cigarettes and Coke evil? Or is it just cigarettes and Coke? Is the cash machine evil? Or is it blue? So that's an interesting question from Jeff, and it seems to go right back to that beings of light, the holographic nature of reality, this message from Christ about the light and the way, the golden compass in your heart provided by God through gnosis, described by St. Paul in Ephesians, would tell you that there is a ghost that is born. That's the title of the album that Jeff worked on, and that was after he left his collaboration with Jay Bennett, who would go on to die. It's almost like Jay Bennett's death was predicted in A Ghost is Born, in the same way that the Twin Towers collapse was epically and eerily predicted in the lyrics of Jesus, etc., and the neoconservative response to a war on terror, it seems to be embedded in War on War. And then there's The Ashes of American Flags, Pot Kettle Black, Poor Places. A number of those songs on that epic classic record seem to have a precognitive awareness. Voices whine, skyscrapers are scraping together, your voice is smoking, last cigarettes are all you can get, turning your orbit around. Again, we have precognitive lyrics published in 2000 and 2001 that seem to have knowledge of the events of September 11th. This whole album was leaked before the events of September 11th, but was officially published early 2002. This is where things get weird, because there's a Mossad connection to Yankee Hotel Foxtrot that makes the precognitive aspect that much more strange. Recently, the Super Deluxe version of the reissue of Yankee Hotel Foxtrot got a perfect 10 in Pitchfork. Of course, they have sponsored links that you can purchase that Super Deluxe. Sometimes, less is more. I purchased the Deluxe version, which has the same booklet. So I took some samples from this reading material provided with that new reissue, and we're going to take a look at the Mossad connection. That is part of one of the albums that was sampled by Jeff Tweedy in the making of that classic record. Somewhere around the fall of 1998, Jeff Tweedy was browsing the bins of Tower Records when he came upon a curious-looking multi-disc set bearing the black and white image of a radio antenna and the title, The Kone Project, Recordings of Shortwave Number Stations. Interesting. So this is the record he would end up getting sued for after they published the album. Shortwave number stations are a perfect method of anonymous one-way communication, ran the record's sleeve notes. Spies anywhere in the world can be communicated to by their masters via small, locally available and unmodified shortwave receivers. The encryption systems used by the number stations, known as a one-time pad, is unbreakable. We'll see about that. Intrigued, Tweedy bought the set, hopped into his Honda Civic, and threw on the first disc. He was immediately hooked by the sounds he heard, the eerie voices of little girls and old men, repeating cryptic combinations of letters, numbers, and random words. One track in particular, phonetic alphabet NATO, believed to be an Israeli Mossad transmission, seized him, and a woman's voice repeated in a monotone Yankee Hotel Foxtrot. I like listening to records for surprise and to be transported to some ethereal consciousness you wouldn't be able to achieve without that soundtrack, says Jeff. The Kone Project was perfect for that. It was a little disorienting, but it was ultimately exciting. As he writes in his 2017 memoir, Let's Go So We Can Get Back, the Kone Project got deep under Jeff's skin. It was as fascinating to me as anything being made by actual musicians using actual instruments. I wanted to know why it was so hypnotic to me. Why could I listen to hours of this stuff, even though I had no clue what any of them were saying? That question became the foundation for Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, the way people communicated or ultimately failed to communicate. In a larger sense, the Kone project would spark a kind of recall for Tweedy, bringing him back to feelings and sounds he'd been enamored with since childhood. As a kid, Tweedy would cradle a small transistor radio under the covers at night, tuning in stations from all over, enraptured by the music, static, and faraway voices floating through the ether. I equate that sound with some feeling of distance, says Tweedy. There's a loneliness to it, but also a yearning. I hear that and think of people reaching out and this need for connection. I don't know if I would have had the words to describe it that way when I first became attracted to that sound, but that idea was always with me. I'm going away where you will look for me. Where I'm going, you cannot come. No one's ever going to take my life from me. I lay it down. A ghost is born. A ghost is born. A ghost is born. I'm an ocean. I'm all emotion. I'm a cherry ghost. Jeff sings in Theologians. And I see, I lay it down. That's words of Christ. A ghost is born 3 times. That's the 3 synoptic gospels. And then the I am statements of the Gospel of John. I am the good shepherd. I know my own. I don't know me. Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not from this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. And for this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. Not his own civic, his own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. Sounds like a used car dealership. He lays down his accord, he picks up a Civic. I'm going away where you will look for me. Where I'm going, you cannot come. No one's ever going to take my life from me. I lay it down. A ghost is born. A ghost is born. A ghost is born. Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And then I'm an ocean. I'm emotion. I'm a cherry ghost. I am love. I am the king. This is Jimmy talking to you. This is an ethereal, mysterious, and ineffable substrate voice that speaks through co-creators like Jeff Tweedy. On page 113, we read the lyrics to What Light? There's a light, white light, one light, white light, inside of you. I see owl, one light, white light. A white owl? As I was working on this video, I noticed an owl. I've never seen one there in the past 2 years. That's interesting. Anyway, we got kind of out there, and things are getting a little weird. What I'm suggesting is that human beings create things, and they're embedded with Easter eggs, like Stanley Kubrick movies, and sometimes those Easter eggs make reference to Nobel Prize-winning physics that seem to be symbolically embedded in the events of 9/11, which also kind of reference the Gospel of Luke. So yeah, it's kind of weird, but it actually, in the big picture, it makes sense. We've got an observer like Schrodinger. Dr. Schrodinger is checking in on his cat inside the box. Jeff sings in one of his songs, a pine box or stop the clocks. Why can't both be true? And it looks like maybe those 2 orders of creation and the 2 worlds and the one world with the light bringer, who says in Luke, I am the light and the way. Perhaps that's talking about the holographic nature of reality that was remade. So maybe we have some sort of collective consciousness memory, like an Akashic record, some sort of residual memory of the patterns of that previous world that was destroyed. And now we're in a world of conceptual light. It's a world of mind, and our brains are like a radio. Wilco's first album, AM, is that Wilco AM can be anagrammed into I am El Cow. That's interesting. We'll get back to that, but there's a kind of a message that someone's kind of married to the mob, so to speak, and stuck singing the praises. So here we have a T and an S. That's a coil. That's the W coil. Wilco is an anagram for W coil, and the W is a wave. And that wave function is the potential location of microscopic or subatomic particles. And they have a potential to be in a particular area of a certain pattern. And then you decide from observing which particular pattern they're going to take on. And it kind of looks like the light and the way embedded in the heliocentric model of the universe, in which the planets are kind of chasing the sun in the light and the way, and that's the W coil. And that's the serpent, the bronze serpent on the cross. It's a reference in the book of Numbers, as well as in the image of Christ on the cross, to that solid sound. And Jeff Tweedy's Western Massachusetts-based music festival is called Solid Sound. So the sound is the wave is also the light, and sound and light is S-A-L, Sol, which also reminds me of S-O-L, Sol, or solar, which is the spirit of love. The precognition, looking back now, goes back to the album Summer Teeth, where Wilco sings about a sickness in the heart. Maybe all I need is a shot in the arm. While I was doing some overlays decoding of Albrecht Dürer's crucifix several years ago, I saw symbolism that something was going to take place that affected the whole world, had something to do with Antichrist, and it was going to officially kick off in 2021, and that happened. The Quarantina of 40 days, and Albrecht Dürer's Antichrist message of kind of spreading the bad news and resenting or hating your neighbor, is even embedded in works by Francisco Goya, who tapped into the draining the swamp thing, and that embeds CH4, methane, that's swamp gas, and CH4 is also Channel 4, that's BBC, where Jordan Peterson became a household name, fighting the Kathy Newman, and the Newman just needs to take the joke, get the shot in the arm. Hell is Chrome, and that's an operating system I'd rather not use. So I'm a fan of the Apple, so Hell is, or Windows 7, so Hell is Chrome, that's someone else's operating system. A Ghost is Born seems to embed some sort of spirit, and it's made of light. After A Ghost is Born comes Sky Blue Sky, and in Sky Blue Sky we have some songs that reference something going down in Germany, where they say 9, and so we have a country that disappears, but the existence of an everlasting everything that's worth fighting for. We have a camel making it through the desert of the real, so that's a birthday party in a camel. That's an esoteric symbol for death and rebirth. And that camel with a fez on also embeds some esoteric Masonic iconography. I'll get into that in another video, but we'll go into the Muslim, pagan, Melha Shriner overlap there. In the album Star Wars from Wilco, we have the joke explained. And then we talk about the random name generator. Now, I've talked about the joke in Star Wars, and I'm referring to not just Star Wars, the movie, but Star Wars, the defense initiative proposed by Ronald Reagan in the early 80s that just celebrated something of a anniversary not too long ago, last March. So we have a lightsaber. That's Anakin's lightsaber replica on the left. That's my hand holding Anakin's replica lightsaber. And then we have the lightsaber on top of World Trade Towers. So we have Star Wars symbolism embedded from the movie, and it's overlapping with Star Wars, the Defense Initiative symbolism. And then we have also a blue beam technology embedded in the new One Trade Tower with the blue lights up in the sky. That Star Wars initiative was March 23rd, 1983. I was 4 years old. I would later grow up in the 80s and 90s and learn about Reagan talking to the UN about visitors from another planet and national consciousness. It was interesting, psychological priming for a UFO visit. And now we have the Pentagon seriously talking about UFOs. It's pretty crazy, and it's a new kind of truth I'm getting used to. And those are Jeff Tweedy lyrics as well. No, your Bible can't be true, Jeff sings on The Whole Love. And he's talking about the death of his father and him kind of addressing his father's ghost, telling him your Bible can't be true. It kind of reminds me of the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament. The New Testament has a light bringer, Christ, who describes himself as a light and a way, and he does away with the 10 Commandments and only has a couple. You get right with the man in the mirror and then love yourself, and your neighbor will follow. What would I do if that white wooden cross meant that I'd lost you? Interesting lyrics from Ode to Joy. That came out in 2019. Love is Everywhere, Beware seems to embed the spirit of the Corona King. Love is the King is a solo album from Jeff Tweedy. And before that came Warm, where he seems to be warming us or warning us about Let's Go Rain. And the Family Ghost on Warmer, that's a second part to that 2-album release in 2018. 2017 saw a solo album with Laminated Cat. That's from a side project called Loose Fur. Not Lucifer, but Loose Fur. So we have here something lost in translation and a bit of a joke explained. Now, there is no character named Lucifer in the Bible. That's a mistranslation in the Latin Vulgate. So in the Old Testament, the devil has a name and it's Satan. And in the New Testament, there's only one light bringer and it's Christ. Pinebox, Stop the Clocks, Why Can't Both Be True? So the pattern of this having it both ways Jeff is singing about, that could be the Schrodinger checking in on the cat, and he's like, oh no, I did not want the cat to be in that condition. Now I have to, well, go faster than the speed of light and, you know, time travel or do something, right, to produce a new order of creation. So the light bringer has reordered the world. So out of chaos comes a new world order, and that's the illumined ones, the Illuminati. A lot of the language we use to describe the evil, bad, you know, they out there, the power elite, a lot of it is actually reappropriated language that better describes Christ as a light bringer who sees chaos in the wave potential function, and then as an observer and a decider opens his eyes, sees the light, and is the light and the way, which is the subatomic particle and the path that shoots out of its origin after it's observed. So it's a retroactive retconning of reality through a consciousness that can go faster than the speed of light. There's more about that to be found in some of the more esoteric stories of the Silver Surfer, but again, that's outside the scope of this video. I'll get into that somewhere else. So we see the Statue of Liberty, that's SOL, that's the solar event, and that's the light and the way, pointing the way to the double slits, which is, well, that's the...
So you have no idea right now?
Oh, there's another one. Another plane just hit.
That's the double slit experiment. So let's go over to Reality Studio TV and talk about how the documentary changed the album. Although Jones and his crew dipped in and out, filming the band intermittently over a period of months in 2001 as funding allowed, having cameras around absolutely affected the dynamic relationship-wise between us all, says Tweedy, and primarily the relationship between Jay and the band was affected, no doubt about it. So Sam Jones is doing a documentary, I'm Trying to Break Your Heart. All of a sudden, Jay was holding court in a way that he never really had before in the studio, says Sterrett, the bass player. There was a lot of grandstanding going on by everyone, I'm sure. That's what was so unnatural about the filming. As great as Sam was, everything was colored by the documentary crew being there. Interestingly enough, that documentary isn't in color, it's black and white. So maybe things becoming extreme and polarized by the documenting of this album, which predicts the 9/11 event. That's kind of means something there. It's not a coincidence here, folks. Up until that point, we were like a family, you know. It's like, holy shit, they're getting this on film? What does it mean? And there was a lot of things I started to see that made me sad and really angry and not happy. I started to think this is dysfunctional. So, having an observer there caused these people to kind of second guess what they're looking at and doing. And, well, let's look at an anagram. Let's break the spell. Yankee Hotel Foxtrot was an eerie spell that was put on Jeff. You can anagram that to spell net hex took arty flow. So the internet hex has taken the arty flow of America and of the world, in the same way that the documentary crew observing Jeff took his arty flow and affected the making of the record. The shiny black boot that cracked my front tooth is a new kind of truth I'm getting used to, Jeff sings. And that is a reference to the Orwellian nature of the world. Which reminds me, this content is for education and facilitating self-empowerment. However, this platform exists to cultivate an addictive and abusive codependent relationship with a vapid materialist pop culture, while data scraping algorithms sync your personal metadata onto pattern maps used to anticipate then invert emergent trends in our collective evolution of consciousness in an effort to compromise our ongoing mass awakening. So there's that. Anyway. The shiny black boot that cracked my front tooth is a new kind of truth I'm getting used to. That shiny black boot is a reference to Orwell. So Jeff is a literate man. He likes his postmodern fiction as well as some other stuff, and I appreciate that. He goes on in Troubled to sing, where the power lines are down, whipping sparks around, like an angel touching down and fading. And this is where things get interesting, because it seems to describe a piece of artwork I made that predicted the worst fires in Colorado history. And those fires went up to and stopped in my backyard. And it was shortly after I was doing videos about bad breath and Nabokov's novel Pale Fire and its relationship to the movie Blade Runner and other interconnected symbolic works. And so the worst wildfires in Colorado history were just a couple of years ago. In 2022, in January 9th, I uploaded a video about the ill wind. Here's footage I shot in my backyard. And you can see just over the line across from the field in my backyard, you can see the flames on the treetops. And I was wondering if that fire was going to cross the street and come into my backyard or not. And I, for the first time in my life, began packing up things that I didn't want to lose in a fire, seriously thinking that might happen. Authorities said it was power lines that were downed. But then it was also something that came from the 12 Tribes Christian community. So the official word from the media, after conducting an investigation, which was updated just recently, said that week-old embers from the 12 tribes were sparked by an XL power line down. So that's interesting. So we've got the 12 tribes and the power lines down. And the 12 tribes of Israel are the wandering Jews. And the wandering Jews don't have a place. They get burned out and smoked out everywhere they go. And other people reappropriate their identity, who are kind of the opposite. And that's kind of the Orwellian weaponization of information that we see in the media. And people will use that information to become weaponized victims. And then it's really hard to talk about, people who are doing this, that, and the other thing, because you'll get labeled as someone that harbors hateful or bigoted ideas. Let's go over to this video, Blake's Philosophia, the knowledge of Sophia, Hallelujah Sunrise. This was a nice essay by Mark Vernon. I don't always agree with Mark, but I appreciated what he had to say, and I listened to it while I was working on this piece of artwork. I uploaded this video on January 25th, 2021. This was well before. This is 11 months before the Marshall Fires. I began working on an image that shows someone it's experiencing a collision of two worlds and a fire, and then an angelic being comes down and rescues them from the fire. So there is someone saved from a fire by an angel 11 months before that Boulder fire. And then as I'm examining this, a spiritual intimation comes over me that puts all of this poetry from Jeff Tweedy together. And it seems like Jeff has something of an esoteric Christian message embedded in his works. I know he's consciously quoting from the Gospel of John, but he may also be unconsciously co-creating. So when he writes where the power lines are down, whipping sparks around like an angel touching down and fading, it sounds like someone is inspiring Jeff to make a esoteric statement that's poetic about a fire caused by power lines and then an angelic being saving someone from that event. And that's exactly what I've created here. And you can see in between these two angelic beings, there is a ram's head and a god of war with flames coming out of his head there, right in the middle. So there's kind of something in the middle, and someone was in danger on the wrong side of the tracks, so to speak. So there's kind of a triptych embedded here in this image, in that there is the blue event, the blue beam event in the middle of this angelic being rescuing someone, and some of that imagery is taken from the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa by Bernini, and this is a beautiful sculpture that I've used a photograph of and reappropriated in a collage. And so I'm taking different pieces of inspired imagery as well as creating my own in order to have an esoteric juxtaposition that inspires nonlinear combinatorial thought. And that's the kind of thought that might tap into that co-creative force. So I try not to think about it too much, but I'm obviously written the name Danger here on the left side of the image, and there's fire and water and a corn, symbol of corn. That is from a Japanese illuminated manuscript on farming. And I've also got some samples from illuminated manuscripts in Latin. I have some diagrams of what looks like two worlds colliding. And this angelic being is essentially taking someone out of danger. And so what I find, once again, is my visual art seems to directly reflect, in a precognitive way, the world in which I live. And if we live in a world that's generated by a substrate consciousness, and we can, to a degree, participate and interact with that consciousness when we are inspired and creating, particularly with a spirit of love, we will find benevolent messages. So this imagery here, as far as I'm concerned, involves me creating a new platform for myself with this green grass. So in an area where there's fire and chaos, I have an angelic being coming down, and I've drawn a little grassy knoll here. And so this imagery represents, symbolically for me, I was thinking of kind of creating a new platform for myself. While I was working on this, I was thinking that this angelic being seems to be almost like creating a new platform for someone who's been deplatformed or re-platformed. So I was trying to use a certain type of symbolism in my work in order to disabuse myself of a situation or a perspective that was unhealthy, and try to look on the bright side. And literally going from one side to another and looking on the bright side is embedded visually in the art. There's noise and chaos and graffiti, and there's also embedded some order. There's some symbolism that maps onto the MAGA hats and some neuroscience, and there is Christian and Jewish symbolism. There's a coded reference to C.S. Lewis and some other things, but for the most part, it's an image of essentially a divine intervention. And this is the symbolism that I find embedded in Jeff Tweedy's lyrics. Let's Go Rain would be something of a song that comes to mind now, since, let's take a look at the satellite image here. For a while, we had a very dry, arid area in my neck of the woods. So my backyard looks right at the edge of the Rocky Mountains there. So I'm right at the foothills of the mountains. And we have power lines down, whipping sparks around like an angel coming down and fading. So we have something of a recombination of the imaginary and poetic world and the real world embedded in that song lyric. And so part of my artwork is in there. That's the imaginary world. And part of the real world is in there. And that's the power lines down, burning up Colorado. And so when I went and created this new platform out of the fire, there's a pattern here of blue, water, and light coming down and growing some grass. And currently, for the past 7 weeks, my area of Colorado and most of Colorado has been getting a record amount of rain and thunderstorms that amounts to the wettest season in over 150 years. So we just had over 40 days of rain. 40 days of rain. Yeah, 1 month ago, why is Colorado so rainy right now? And then a few days ago, June already broke records for the most rainfall. And sometimes that rain comes in the form of hail. So here's hail bouncing off the sidewalk right in front of my house. I got a little townhouse in a nice cul-de-sac. There's a lot of area in the backyard. It's never been this green. It's never been this green. This record amount of rain. It's almost supernatural. We've got fire and then we've got ice. So again, I talk about the Song of Fire and Ice. That embeds S-O-F-I-A or S-O-F-A-I. The Song of Fire and Ice. The Song of Fire in the air. So we had fire in my backyard. Now there's ice in my backyard. And I talked about how there was a changing of the guard and a type of inversion event that maps onto the character of Jason's experience in Acts 17. Jason is suspected of harboring Paul, and so the police raid his home and arrest him and then take some money from him. Something similar happened to me. My home was raided a couple of years ago. I'll do a separate video on that, but everything was vacated in court. The judge clearly had common sense and saw things from my perspective, and all those charges were dropped. So there is no more legal blah, blah, blah in Colorado for me, but I'll do a separate video on that. Anyway, yeah, so things are turning around, literally. I mean, look at that artwork. We got something turning around. We got the fire. Now we got the ice. Up is down. Jason in Act 17 is in an inverted world. And now I want to show you an illustration of what my dad showed me. Hello, everybody. we'll do a little recap, and then I'll show you what I felt like was something that went kind of beyond the average spiritual intimation and took on the character of kind of like a direct message from my deceased father. So that was something that hadn't happened to me before. And I had done some work on the word love before, and I was kind of meditating on that when I was thinking about Wilco and things I loved and just the emotional resonance of feeling love as something like a cognitive substrate that works like a medium. And when you tune into that, to live on a day-to-day basis is insufficient for human beings. We need to transcend, transport, escape. We need meaning, understanding, and explanation. We need to see overall patterns in our lives. We need hope, the sense of a future, and we need freedom, or at least the illusion of freedom, to get us beyond ourselves, whether with telescopes and microscopes and our ever-burgeoning technology, or in states of mind that allow us to travel to other worlds, to rise above our immediate surroundings. Oliver Sacks. Patreon.com/Bickford. Thanks for the support.
Well, what was it like?
People had more than they needed. We had no idea what was precious, what wasn't.